Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new tutorial. This one's a bit longer than usual and for a good reason. Not only is it a beginner-friendly Blender tutorial, but it's also perfect for beginners in Photoshop. In this tutorial, we're going to create a beautiful coffee cup in Blender and design its label entirely from scratch in Photoshop. I'll walk you through every step, including how to create a seamless pattern design in Photoshop. And here's the exciting part. At some point in the tutorial, I'll show you how to sync your Photoshop file with Blender. This means that whenever you make changes in Photoshop, they'll automatically reflect in Blender. How cool is that? Make sure you watch the entire video without skipping any parts, especially if you're a beginner, because this tutorial is packed with useful tips and you don't want to miss anything important. All right, let's get started. All right, so first things first, we need to start fresh. Let's select everything in the scene, then press X to bring up the delete menu and confirm by hitting enter. Before we start modeling, let me enable the screencast tool for you guys. This tool will show every button I press at the bottom corner of the screen so you can easily follow along. All right, now we're ready to begin. For the coffee cup, we'll start with a cylinder. To add one, press Shift-A, hover over Mesh and select Cylinder. Once the cylinder is added, look at the bottom left corner of your screen. You'll see a small pop-up menu. Click it to adjust the cylinder's properties. Let's change the number of vertices to 16. This simplifies the geometry, making it easier to work with. Now, select the cylinder by left-clicking on it and press Tab to enter Edit mode. In Edit mode, we'll start shaping the cylinder. To adjust its height, press S, that's the shortcut for scaling, then press Z to constrain the scaling to the Z-axis. Scale it down just a tiny bit, flattening it slightly. Next, we want to shape the top edge of the cylinder. Hold Alt and then click on the top edge loop. Holding Alt allows you to select an entire edge loop in one click. Super handy for these types of edits. With the top edge loop selected, press S again to scale it inward slightly. This gives the cylinder a tapered, more realistic look. Now, let's move that edge loop upward. Press G twice. This activates the Edge Slide tool, which lets you slide the edge loop along its neighboring geometry. Move it up just a tiny bit to refine its position. All right, now we're going to give our cup some depth. With the top face of the cylinder selected, press I to inset the face. This creates an inner edge loop. Then press E to extrude downward along the Z-axis. This step hollows out the cup. After that, press I one more time to add another inset on the bottom face. Finally, press X and choose Faces to delete that inset face, leaving the interior of the cup hollow. Next, hold Alt and select the inner edge loop we just created. Once it's selected, press Ctrl F to bring up the face menu and choose Grid Fill. To further refine the cup's shape, we'll add some loop cuts. Press Ctrl R to activate the Loop Cut tool. Click to add a loop cut near the middle of the cup and then repeat this process to add another cut closer to the base. All right, let's clean up the top of the cup. Move to the top part of the cylinder and make sure you're in Face Select mode. You can switch to this mode by either clicking the face icon at the top of the screen or pressing 3 on your keyboard. Select the top face of the cylinder and press X, then choose Faces to delete it. Let's add some more loop cuts to prepare the cup for smoothing. Press Ctrl R again, and this time scroll your mouse wheel to add multiple loop cuts. This increases the geometry's resolution, which is essential for creating smooth curves. Once that's done, press Tab to exit edit mode and return to object mode. Press Ctrl+2. This is a shortcut to add a subdivision surface modifier with a level of 2 smoothing. You can verify this by going to the Modifier tab on the right side of the screen. Here, you'll see that the subdivision surface modifier is applied with 2 levels of smoothing. All right, next up, we need to give our model some thickness. To do this, let's add the Solidify modifier. Go to the Modifier tab on the right-hand side, click on Add Modifier, and choose Solidify Modifier from the list. Now pay attention to the modifier stack order. Make sure to move the Solidify modifier above the subdivision surface modifier. This ensures that the thickness is applied before smoothing. Let's adjust the thickness value to 0.03. Next, let's smooth out the shading on our object. Right-click on the model and select Shade Smooth from the context menu. Now it's time to apply the Solidify modifier. click on the drop-down menu next to the modifier and choose Apply. This makes the thickness part of the actual geometry. Alright, now let's refine the model further. Press Tab to enter edit mode so we can see how everything is looking so far. Press Ctrl R to activate the loop cut tool. Hover over the model and you'll see a yellow line indicating where the loop cut will go. Add a loop cut near the edge, just like this, and click to confirm. Next, hold Alt and click on the newly added edge loop. Holding Alt allows you to select the entire loop in one go. With the edge loop selected, press Shift-D to duplicate it. Once you've duplicated it, right-click to cancel the move and snap it back into its original position. Now press P and from the menu, choose Separate by Selection. This step creates a new object from the selected edge loop. Let's focus on the new object we just created. Hit Tab to enter edit mode on it. With the edge loop selected, go to the Object menu, navigate to Convert and select Curve. This action converts the mesh edge into a curve, which we'll use for additional details. With the curve selected, go to the Object Data Properties tab. It looks like a green curve icon. Under the Geometry section, locate the bevel settings and increase the depth to 0.03. This adds thickness to the curve, making it visible as a 3D object. To smooth the curve's appearance, press Ctrl 2 to add a subdivision surface modifier with 2 levels of smoothing. You can verify this by checking the Modifier tab. You'll see that the subdivision surface modifier has been added. Right-click on the curve and select Shade Smooth to further enhance its look. Now we need to parent the curve to the main cup so that they move together. First, select the curve by left-clicking on it. Then, hold Shift and left-click on the cup to add it to the selection. With both objects selected, press Ctrl P and from the menu, choose Object, keep Transform. Now, whenever you move the cup, the curve will follow along, keeping everything aligned perfectly. Alright, let's position our cup properly before moving on. Press G, followed by Z, to move it upwards along the Z-axis, just a little bit like this. Great, the modeling of our cup is complete. Now it's time to unwrap the cup so we can create a label for it. First, let's split our workspace. Drag the slider from the edge of your viewport to create a new tab. Change this tab from 3D Viewport to UV Editor. Now click to select the cup and press Tab to enter Edit mode. To make unwrapping easier, let's isolate the cup. Press / to solo the object. This will make it easier to see and work with the top of the cup. Next, hold Alt and click on the edge loop near the top of the cup to select it. While holding Shift, click on another edge loop near the bottom of the cup. This ensures we've selected both loops that will define the label area. Once both edge loops are selected, press U and from the menu, choose Mark Seam. This tells Blender where to cut the mesh when unwrapping. Next, we need to mark a vertical seam. Click to select an edge along the side of the cup. Make sure you're selecting an edge that aligns properly. Now hold Ctrl and then click further along the same edge. This selects a path of connected edges between your first and second selection. Press U again and choose Mark Seam from the menu. This vertical seam will help unwrap the cup into a flat layout. Now it's time to unwrap the entire model. Press A to select all the geometry. Once everything is selected, press U and choose Unwrap. In the UV editor, you'll see that the mesh has been unwrapped into flat UV islands. Let's clean this up a bit. Hover over any part of a UV island and press L to select the entire island. Now press G to grab it and move it out of the workspace to keep things organized. Repeat the same process for any other islands you see. Hover over, press L and then G to move it aside. Now, focus on the main UV island, which represents the label area of the cup. This is what we'll be working with for the next steps. Alright, before we move forward, we need to make sure that all the UVs in this mesh are aligned to the same shape and size. This will make it easier for us to create our label. To do this, we'll adjust one UV square so it's perfectly aligned, and then link it to the rest. First, make sure you're in Edge Select mode. You can switch to Edge Select mode by pressing 2 on your keyboard or by clicking on the edge icon in the toolbar. Next, select this edge here. Now press S, Y, then type 0. What this does is align the edge perfectly along the Y-axis. Let's repeat the process for the bottom edge of the same face. Select the bottom edge, press S, then Y, and type 0 again. This aligns it to the Y-axis too. Now let's move to the side edges and align them to the X-axis. Select the first side edge of the face, then press S, then X, and type 0. This makes the edge perfectly horizontal. Do the same for the other side edge. Select it, press S, X, then type. And there we go. Now we have one perfectly aligned square. This square will serve as the active face that we'll use to align the rest of the UVs. Next, switch to Face Select mode. You can activate this by pressing 3 on your keyboard or by clicking the face icon in the toolbar. Now select the face we just aligned. With this face selected, press L. This will select all the connected UV faces. Notice that the face we aligned earlier is now highlighted. That means it's the active face. Right-click and choose Follow Active Quads from the menu. This action aligns all the faces to match the active face. Just like that, our entire UV layout is clean and uniform. Now, let's rotate the layout for better orientation. Press R, then type 90, and hit Enter to rotate it 90 degrees. To center it, press G, and use your mouse to move the layout to the center of the UV editor. If you need to adjust the size, press S to scale it, just like this. Now that the UVs are properly aligned and positioned, we're ready to export this UV layout into Photoshop to create the label for the cup. To export, go to the UV menu at the top and select Export UV Layout. A pop-up will appear where you can name your file. I'll name mine Cup UV. Once you've typed in the name, click Save to export the layout. Once you're done with aligning the UVs, you can press backslash to bring back the curve we created for the cup and exit solo mode. Next, let's open Photoshop. Once Photoshop is open, click on File and then Open and locate the UV layout we just exported from Blender. After opening it, you should see your UV layout displayed just like this. Now, to work with it, select the UV layout layer in the Layers panel and press Ctrl-C to copy it. Next, go to File, then New. Photoshop will automatically grab the dimensions of the UV layout you just copied, so the width and height will match perfectly. Before creating the new workspace, let's increase the resolution to 300 dpi. This will ensure better quality for the final label. Once that's done, click Create. You'll now have a new workspace based on the exact dimensions of the UV layout you exported. Now before we start designing the label, we'll first create a background pattern for it. To create a repeatable pattern, we need a perfect square canvas. Go to File, then New again. In the Width field, copy the number, then paste it into the Height field to make the dimensions equal. Once again, increase the resolution to 300 dpi for a crisp and clean result, and then click Create. Now we have two workspaces open, one for the UV layout and one for the repeat pattern we're about to design. Next, we'll need some images to create our repeat pattern. Let's grab those before moving on. Now, I've got this image here that I'm going to use for our pattern design. To open it, I'll press Ctrl-O to bring up the import menu, and then I'll locate and open the flower silhouette image I downloaded. If you want to use a similar image, you can go to Google and type in flower silhouette to find a variety of black and white images that work perfectly for pattern design. Adjusting the colors. Next, we need to change the colors of these black and white images. To do this, activate the Magic Wand tool by clicking its icon here or press W on your keyboard. With the tool active, select one of the flower parts in the image. Now, to fill it with a color, press Shift Backspace. This will bring up the Fill menu. Pro tip, if Shift Backspace doesn't work for you, try pressing Shift F5. Or go to Edit in the top menu and then select Fill. All three options achieve the same result. In the Fill menu, change the Contents option from Pattern to Color and choose the color you want. For this first flower, I'll go with green, just like this. Once you've filled the shape, press Ctrl D to deselect it. Now select another part of the image. Repeat the process by pressing Shift Backspace, choosing Color in the Fill menu, and selecting a different color. This time I'll go with red. Continue the process. Repeat this for the rest of the elements in the image, changing each to a color of your choice. Once you're done with coloring, it's time to start creating our repeat pattern. For this, switch back to the square working layout we created earlier. This is where we'll design our repeat pattern. Let's move on. Before we proceed, we need to copy these images. So with the magic wand tool still selected, click to select the image you want to copy. Then press Ctrl C to copy it. Next, go back to the square canvas and press Ctrl V to paste it. Once the image is pasted, switch to the Move tool by clicking this icon here, or you can just press V on your keyboard to activate it. Now move the image into place. Once you're happy with the positioning, press Enter to confirm the position. Repeat this process for the other images. First, make sure the magic wand tool is still selected. Then press Ctrl D to deselect the previous selection. Now select the next image and press Ctrl C to copy it. Go back to the square layout, press Ctrl V to paste the image, and use the Move tool to position it. Repeat this for all the images. I'm going to fast forward through this part so you don't get bored, but you get the idea. Once you've arranged all your images, it's time to start creating the repeat. But before that, we need to enable the pattern preview mode so you can see how the repeat will look. To do that, go to View, then make sure to check Pattern Preview, like this, and click OK. This will allow us to see the pattern created from the images we've arranged. Adjusting the repeat. Select the first image. You can also select it directly from the Layers panel. If you don't see the blue layout around the image, make sure that Show Transform Controls is turned on in the options bar at the top, and also make sure Auto Select is checked. Now you can adjust the image however you want. One important thing about the repeat, if you move an image outside of the frame, the part that extends beyond the frame will repeat on the other side automatically. However, be careful when rotating your images. Once part of the image moves out of the frame and you confirm the position, you can no longer rotate it freely. If you try to rotate it after it's been positioned outside the box, it will cause problems. So, before confirming any changes, make sure the image is rotated exactly how you want it, because once it's outside the box and confirmed, you won't be able to rotate it again without issues. Once you're done, you can zoom out by pressing Ctrl lashed on your keyboard to see how the pattern looks. All right, so now we have something like this, which I think looks pretty nice. Once you're happy with it, go back to View and then turn off Pattern Preview. Next, we need to define the pattern in Photoshop. To do that, select the first layer, then scroll down and hold Shift and select the last layer. This will select all the images in between. Right-click and choose Merge Layers to combine all these layers. Once merged, we're ready to define the pattern. Now, select the background layer and delete it. You can click the trash icon to delete the layer and confirm by clicking OK. This will leave us with a transparent background. To define this pattern, press Ctrl to select everything on the canvas or simply click on the layer itself. Then go to Edit, Define Pattern. A pop-up will appear and you can give this pattern any name you want. Let's call it Flower Pattern and click OK to define it. You can confirm that the pattern is defined by going to Edit, Fill, and for the content, choose Pattern. Under the Custom Pattern dropdown, you should see the pattern you just defined. Now that the pattern is defined, you can close this tab and the other one as well. We're now back in our label workspace, ready to apply the pattern. Okay, so before we start designing our label, let's first fill it with our pattern. To do that, make sure you click this lock icon right here to unlock the layer. Once unlocked, go to the effect icon at the bottom of the layers panel and click it. Then select Pattern Overlay. This will overlay the pattern on the canvas. Now, click the drop-down next to the pattern preview and choose our flower pattern, just like this. You'll see our pattern is now filled on the canvas. Next, we need to adjust the scale of the pattern. You can simply drag this slider here to adjust the scale. Let's go with 18. Something like this. You can also change the rotation to give it a little variation. To do that, double-click on the pattern layer again to open the settings menu. Now adjust the angle slider to change the pattern's orientation. I think this looks good. Once you're satisfied, click OK to confirm. Next, we need to change the background color of the label. To do this, press Shift Backspace to open the Fill menu. For the Content option, click the drop-down and select Color. Now choose a very light color. I'll go with a light brown color. Once selected, click OK to confirm. Now that we've set up the pattern and background, we can create the label itself. To do that, we'll use the Shape tool. Under the Tools menu, click and hold on the Rectangle tool, and then choose the Polygon tool. Now left-click anywhere on the canvas and drag to create your shape. You can hold Shift to maintain the aspect ratio, but I want to stretch it out back, so I'll click and drag freely to get something like this. All right, next we need to make sure this shape is aligned correctly. With the shape selected, make sure you click on the polygon layer in the Layers panel, or click directly on the shape itself. Now go to the Move tool and select it. Next, click on these three buttons in the top menu to open the alignment options. Change the Align tool from Selection to Canvas. Then click to align the shape vertically and horizontally to the center of the canvas, like this. Now that it's aligned, let's change the fill color of the shape to black. To do this, go back to the Shape tool again, click on Fill, and change the color to black. Next, we need to duplicate this layer. Click on the polygon layer, then drag it to the plus icon at the bottom of the Layers panel to duplicate it, just like this. Now you'll have the duplicated layer on top and the original layer at the bottom. Adding stroke to the duplicated layer. Select the duplicated layer and go to the Stroke option. Change the stroke color to white. Increase the stroke size to about 15 so that the stroke is visible around the shape, like this. Next, select the original polygon shape, the one underneath, and increase the stroke so that you can clearly see it around your shape, like this. Now let's round the edges of the duplicated layer. With the duplicated layer selected, make sure you are on Polygon 2 Copy. Then click on this button here to drag the corners and round the edges a little bit, like this. You should now have something like this. Next, you are going to do the same thing for the original shape. Click on the original shape, the one behind, and use the same button to drag the edges around them, but not too much, like this. Now select the original shape again and change the fill color to brown. If you can't find brown in the color palette, just click on the color box and manually choose brown from the color picker. Now, let's do the same thing for the stroke. Change the stroke color of the original shape to brown, just like this. Next, we need to create text for our label. Selecting the Type tool, go to the Type tool here in the Tools panel. Now click and drag on the canvas to create a text box. You should see a blinking cursor ready for text. Before doing that, make sure no shapes are selected. If any shapes are selected, you'll notice the Type tool icon changes to a circular shape. This indicates that if you click inside the shape, your text will conform to the shape, which we don't want. If you accidentally have a shape selected, just click on an empty space on your canvas to deselect everything. Once you've ensured no shapes are selected, click on your canvas and drag to create a text box. Type in your text. Now, delete the placeholder text and type EFB, or whatever text you want for your label. After that, move the text to the center of the label. You can use the Move tool shortcut to adjust the position. Next, let's change the text color to white. You can do this by highlighting the text and selecting white from the color palette. Now go back to the Type tool and select the text. Click on this icon to open the Warp Text options. Here, choose Arc from the list of distortions. To adjust the text shape, increase the vertical distortion to get a nice curve, and slightly reduce the bend to fine-tune the appearance. Once you're happy with the result, move the text down to position it perfectly on your label, just like this. Next, make sure you click anywhere on the canvas to deselect any active selections. Then go back to the Type tool, T, and click and drag to create a new text box. Type chocolate into the text box. Double-click to select all the text, then hover your mouse over the font size option and drag to increase the size. Click to confirm the size once you're happy with it. If you're wondering what font I'm using for the text, it's Impact. To apply this font, click on the font drop-down, type Impact, and select it from the list. Next, click anywhere on the canvas to ensure you are using the Type tool, and click and drag to create another text box. If you can't see the text, it's likely because the font size is too big. Reduce the size until you have something like this. Once you're satisfied, delete the placeholder text and type coffee instead. Double-click to select all the text, then change the font style. Afterward, increase the font size if necessary. Now align the text to the center. Use the Move tool to position it exactly where you want it. Drag the text up to the desired position. Once you've finished with the text, select the background shape. If you're unable to select it directly, go to the Layers panel and select the Shape layer there. Next, let's add a drop shadow to the background shape to add some depth. To do this, click on the Add Layer Style icon at the bottom of the Layers panel and choose Drop Shadow. Set the following options: opacity to 60, spread to 24, size to 73, and color to black. Once you have these settings, click OK to confirm. Finally, zoom out to view the overall design. Next, we need to create some variation at the top. So to do that, go to the rectangular marquee tool, press M, click and drag anywhere on the canvas. Once you've done that, click the New Layer icon to create a new layer. Now press Shift Backspace on your keyboard and fill it with color. I'm going with a brown color, something like this. Click OK to confirm. Now let's do the same thing for the bottom section. Press Shift Backspace again and fill it with the same color. Afterward, press Ctrl D to deselect the selection. Now select the new layer and apply the pattern we created earlier. Go to the Effects panel and add a pattern overlay. Increase the size to about 30 stat to achieve the desired effect. Once you're happy with how it looks, press Ctrl S or Command S Mac to save your Photoshop file. Name it Label and click Save. Alright, now we are done creating the label. It's time to add it to our model. Let's go back to the Blender project. Before we do anything, drag the workspace to switch it to the shader editor. You can also press N to hide the side panel for more space. Next, change the render view to viewport shading. Then, switch the render engine from Eevee to Cycles, And if you have a GPU, change the render device from CPU to GPU for better performance. If you don't have a GPU, you can leave it as is. Finally, press Tab to enter object mode. Now you can see our scene is very dark, so we need to add some lights. To do this, switch from object to world in the shader editor. Select the background node and press Ctrl-T to add an environment texture. Before using this shortcut, make sure the Node Wrangler add-on is enabled. To enable it, go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, search for Node Wrangler, and ensure it's checked. Once it's enabled, click Open on the Environment Texture node to load your HDRI. I'm using an HDRI from Polyhaven. If you want to use the same, go to Google, type Polyhaven HDRI, and find a suitable one. The HDRI I'm using can be found there. After selecting it, change the resolution from 4K to 1K to save space. 1K is sufficient for lighting purposes. Download the HDRI and open it in Blender. Now that you've added the HDRI, you should see lighting in your scene. Next, switch the workspace from UV layout to the 3D viewport so we can set up the camera. To add a camera, press Shift-A, go to Camera, and add it to the scene. With the camera selected, press Ctrl-Alt-0 on the numpad to align the camera to your current view. This will give you a better perspective of your scene through the camera's lens. First, press N to bring up the side panel. Navigate to View, and then click on Lock Camera to View. This allows you to adjust the camera's position interactively as you navigate the viewport. Once you've positioned the camera to your liking, now press N once more and make sure to uncheck the Lock Camera to View option. This ensures that the camera remains stationary while you make further adjustments. At this point, you might notice that our HDRI is casting light primarily on one side of the scene. To balance the lighting, we need to rotate the HDRI. To do this, go to the mapping node within the shader editor. Under rotation, you'll see 3 values corresponding to the X, Y, and Z axes. Drag the Z value to rotate the HDRI and adjust the lighting direction as needed. Since we're using cycles as our rendering engine, which can be slower, let's switch to Eevee for a faster preview. To do this, go to the Render Engine dropdown at the top of the Render Properties tab and select Eevee. Now, let's adjust our HDRI again to ensure the lighting is casting correctly on the side we want. Great, now we have some light casting on the desired side. Perfect. Next, let's add a plane to our scene to serve as a base or surface. Press Shift-A, go to Mesh, and select Plane. Once the plane is added, press S to scale it up to your desired size. Now press Tab to enter Edit mode. Select one of the edges by clicking on it, then press E to extrude along the Z-axis. After extruding, select the newly created edge and press Ctrl-B to bevel it. You can press A to select all vertices and move everything slightly to the back to add some depth. Once you're satisfied with the bevel, press Tab to return to object mode. Right-click on the plane and select Shade Smooth to smooth out the edges. Alright, now we can add our label to the cup. Switch from World to Object mode by selecting it from the Workspace tabs. Ensure that the cup is selected, then go to the Material Properties tab and click New to add a new material. Now let's change the base color of the cup to a green shade. You can choose any green color you like, something vibrant works well. However, you'll notice the green affects the entire cup, including the inside, and that's not what we want. To fix this, go to the Material Properties tab and click the Add Slot button to create a new material slot. Select the new slot and click New to create a second material. Keep the base color of this material as white and set the roughness to 1 to give it a paper-like texture. Next, select the cup in the viewport and press Tab to enter edit mode. To make it easier to assign materials, switch the workspace from 3D viewport to the UV editor. In the UV editor, select the outside part of the cup by clicking on the outer mesh and pressing Ctrl-L to select all linked vertices. To ensure your selections sync between the UV editor and the 3D viewport, click the Sync Selection button, the icon that looks like 2 connected squares. Once you've selected the outer mesh, hover over the 3D viewport and press Ctrl-I to invert the selection, so the inside of the cup is selected. With this inverted selection, go back to the Material Properties tab, ensure the second material slot, white paper texture, is selected, and then click Assign. This assigns the white material to the inside of the cup while keeping the green material on the outside. When that's done, return to the first material, the green one, and adjust its roughness to 1 for a consistent paper-like finish. Now, exit edit mode by pressing Tab and select the curve. Add a new material in the Material Properties tab, set the base color to white and increase the roughness to 1. Select the cup and ensure the green material is still active. Press Ctrl-T to add an image texture node. If this shortcut doesn't work, ensure the Node Wrangler add-on is enabled in your Blender preferences. Locate and open the Photoshop file you saved earlier, the label design. Once the texture is loaded, you may notice it's not perfectly aligned. To fix this, with the cup still selected, press Tab to enter edit mode. In the UV editor, select all UVs by pressing A, then scale them along the y-axis by pressing S followed by Y. Adjust until the label fits the cup perfectly. Once satisfied, press Tab to exit edit mode and you'll see the label correctly wrapped around the cup. Now let's arrange the scene. Switch back to the 3D viewport. Select the cup, press R and then Z to rotate it around the Z-axis for a better orientation. Next, focus on the camera. If selecting the camera is tricky, locate it in the outliner and select it from there. Go to the Camera Properties tab and adjust the focal length to 80mm or 90mm to create a more focused perspective. Finally, select the cup again. Under the outliner, right-click on it and choose Select Hierarchy to ensure everything parented to the cup, including the curve, is selected. This will help manage and move the entire object as a single unit. Press R to rotate the object to achieve a natural placement. Next, press Shift-D to duplicate it, and immediately right-click to snap the duplicate back to its original position. Then press G, followed by Z twice, to move the duplicate along the local Z-axis for vertical variation. Repeat this process. Shift-D, right-click, and move along the Z-axis again to create another duplicate at a different height. Now press Shift-D one more time to make another duplicate, but this time press G to move it to the side, positioning it wherever it fits best in the scene. Use R to rotate this duplicate to vary its orientation, adding more realism. Next, select the background object. In the Material Properties panel, click New to create a new material. Set the base color to a dark brown shade for contrast and warmth. Reduce the specular value to minimize unwanted highlights and keep the background matte and unobtrusive. Now select the camera. Go to the Camera Properties panel, enable Depth of Field, and use the eyedropper tool to set the focus object to the cup. Adjust the f-stop value to 0.5 or reduce it to 0.3 for a beautifully blurred background that draws attention to the subject. Finally, switch to the Render Properties panel. Under Color Management, change the look setting from None to Medium-High Contrast. This adjustment makes the colors in your scene pop, adding vibrancy and depth to the final render. Alright, now you can see there are some shadows in the scene, and we can enhance it by filling in the shadows with some area light. To do this, press Shift-A, go to Light, and select Area Light. After adding it, press R, type 90, and rotate it by 90 degrees. Position the light where it fills the shadows effectively, and you can scale it up slightly for a broader, softer illumination. Next, under the Object Data Properties of the area light, increase the power to 100 or 200 Ja, depending on how much brightness you want. You can toggle the light off and on to observe the difference. Light off and light on. This small adjustment helps eliminate the harsh shadows and brightens the scene beautifully. Now, switch the render engine from Eevee to Cycles for better realism. Once done, adjust the render samples in the settings. I'll set it to 200G for a balance between quality and render speed. Here's an awesome trick I'd like to show you. One of the benefits of using a Photoshop file instead of an exported PNG is that any changes you make in Photoshop are automatically reflected in Blender. Let me demonstrate. Go back to your Photoshop file and make some changes. For instance, I'll modify the Saw Chocolate text here and add a stroke effect to enhance its appearance. Once you've made your edits, save the Photoshop file. Now switch back to Blender. In the UV editor, ensure the label is selected, go to Image, and select Reload. This will update the image texture in Blender with the latest changes from Photoshop without needing to reapply the image. Sometimes the changes might not appear immediately in the rendered view. I'm not entirely sure why this happens, but it's easy to fix. Simply switch to Material Preview mode and then back to Render Preview mode. This will force Blender to refresh the texture, and you'll see the updated design on your model. Now that everything looks good, it's time for the final step, rendering the image. Go to the Render menu at the top and select Render Image. Your design is now ready for export. I hope you enjoyed following along with this beginner-friendly tutorial. We've not only learned how to create a stunning coffee cup in Blender, but also how to design its label from scratch in Photoshop. If you found this tutorial helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. I've got plenty of exciting tutorials planned, so stay tuned. Also, if you have any questions or if there's a topic you'd like me to cover in a future video, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep creating and experimenting. See you in the next tutorial.